Happy birthday, PowerCLI!
I'm Jake Robinson, the product manager for PowerCLI, and on behalf of all of us here, including the development team for PowerCLI in Sofia, Bulgaria, we want to thank the community for the last 10 years, and we're looking forward to the next 10 years. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Happy birthday, PowerCLI. I can't believe it's been 10 years already. Thanks for everything that you've done for the VMware community and our customers. You have allowed us to automate everything within the VMware SDDC, and we thank you for that. I hope you enjoy this special day with all of your closest friends at VMworld. See you later from Virtually Ghetto.
Hey guys, just on my way to the airport to fly to Las Vegas for VMworld, but there's one thing I still needed to do, and that was congratulate all of you with the 10-year anniversary of PowerCLI. Thanks for all the hard work you guys put in, and thanks for making PowerCLI into what it is today, because without the community, it wouldn't have been possible. Thanks, and again, congratulations.
Hi guys, this is Frank. I can't believe it's already the 10th birthday of PowerCLI. What I do remember is a PowerCLI man running through the house like it was yesterday. So Alan and Luke, have a blast presenting this 10th birthday session of PowerCLI. Have fun guys.
Hello, this is a message from my favourite Belgian, Mr. Luc Deakins, and my favourite Frenchman, Mr. Alain Reneuf. Congratulations to you both, and congratulations to PowerCLI on your 10th birthday. See you all at VMworld.
Ah, PowerCLI, 10 years old. I remember when you first came into the world, you were a tiny little shell that allowed us to manage small amounts of our virtualization infrastructure. But now, you're a big kid. You can basically allow us to manage everything, which is pretty exciting. All kidding aside, it's been amazing over the last 10 years, all the things that we've been able to do with PowerCLI, the impact that it's had on my life, and the work that we've done in the data centers. In fact, without PowerCLI, I wouldn't have this little guy. It's a crowd pleaser. Anyway, happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Hey everyone, this is Eric Sloven. Back in 2007, I was one of the very first PowerCLI users, and I want to wish PowerCLI a very happy 10th birthday.
Hi everyone, longtime PowerShell MVP Jeff Hicks, here to wish PowerCLI a very happy birthday. VMware was one of the first vendors to really get PowerShell and offer a terrific solution that followed the PowerShell model. It made me very happy. Anyway, and the PowerCLI community has always been fantastic. Great people there. Looking forward to working with you guys some more in the future. Congratulations, and looking forward to a lot more great things from you in the next 10 years. Happy birthday.
Hey guys, from a place called Venlo in Denmark. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
I've just got back from somebody who nearly used the UI. That was a close one. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Happy birthday.
Yay!
Happy birthday.
Yay!
I've always wanted to start with a promotional video. That's about as close as I get. And baby lamb at the end is just the cutest thing ever, by the way. So thanks again for attending our session. It blows my mind. You guys keep coming back every single year. We keep trying to find things to talk about every single year, trying to keep you entertained. Just as I think you've learned enough from us, you ask us to come back and present again. And to be honest, Luke and I love doing this. So we're here today to give you a special edition of our PowerCLI session. In fact, it's the 10th anniversary of PowerCLI. It was brought out back in 2007. So we thought we'd have a little bit of fun and give you some information about where you guys have come from, what you guys have been doing, and what we've been doing with the product, and also show you some things that we've changed in the past and in our scripts as we've learned as well. So I'm going to start with the disclaimer. I'm sure everybody's taking out their phones and taking a photo of this slide right now, so I will move on. Again, it's the PowerCLI 10th birthday, so this is a special edition. We do start out giving you a little bit of information about the community, but we do get pretty deep towards the end, and I hope that's what you're expecting to see, because Luke and I normally do a deep dive session. So we're going to start with the beginnings, where it came from. We're going to move on to the path to fame, where it is now. And then we're going to talk about the community as well. And then we're going to go through some of the deep dive stuff and then tell you how you can actually learn more about PowerCLI and where it's headed.
Okay, good afternoon from me as well. And I'm also very happy to see the room quite filled on Wednesday afternoon for something that is already 10 years old, but that doesn't stop and keeps amazing us every time there's a new release or a new build available to us. I'm going to present my co-speaker, Alan Renouf. He doesn't need any presentation because I think most of you know him. If you shouldn't, there's a few keywords that you can find on this slide. He's and now I will have to read it, otherwise I pronounce it. He's a senior product line manager at VMware. He's especially busy with REST APIs and so on and so on.
Yep.
He has his blog, which hasn't been that active lately, but you still find a valuable amounts of useful information on there.
Stick that knife in.
No, not really. That's called motivation, Alan.
Thanks.
No, there is stuff on there that is eternal and you can keep using it. You find him on Twitter. He's very open. If you have any questions, remarks, desires, talk to him, address him. He's the guy to go to, and Jake in the meantime as well.
Yeah, absolutely want to echo what Luke said there. My job is to make sure that the product is good for you. And I can only do that if you tell me what you don't like or what you want made easier or what we're doing wrong. So if we're doing that stuff, like Luke said, feel free to heckle me on Twitter publicly or send me a DM or even just send me an email. My email address is renoufe@vmware.com. Always happy to receive your feedback and make sure that we're prioritized on the right things. So I'm going to introduce you to Luke Deakins, the father of dragons, the breaker of chains, the PowerCLI king, who is clearly known through his activity on the VMTN account. If you've ever raised a question in there, you'll know that Luke has probably answered it. We're going to give you a few stats on actually how fast he's answered it today. So his personal blog, definitely one to keep an eye out for, luked.info. He's clearly more active than I am, so check his blog out. He's a vExpert and a PowerShell MVP as well.
Thank you.
And his Twitter handle is LukeD22.
Okay, this is a historic slide, so if you want to take a picture, please go ahead. You will never see this again afterwards. This was a very early, and I don't even think it was intended as a technical preview, but I got my hands on it end of 2007. This is the very first snap-in that I got my hands on, like I said. And if you look at the number of commandlets in there, it's a huge amount of 8 commandlets that you had in that snap-in. Now, what is remarkable in there is the get view commandlet. And I keep repeating this every year. One of the strengths of PowerCLI from day one has been just the existence of this get view commandlet. Now, what we try to do here as well, we try to graph, and I suppose that is perhaps a bit too much details for the back of the room, but what we try to show in here, there's at the top of the graphic, you have a timeline. At the left there, you see in 2006, Microsoft started with PowerShell, and already by the end of 2007, that first technical preview for PowerCLI, it was called VI Toolkit at that point in time, was released for a limited audience, and then in 2008, they released the first official version, version 1. And it continued growing like that. There's a jump in 2009 when they went from 1.5 to 4, but that was to align versioning, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And what you also see on the bottom line of this graphic is that they changed the name a couple of times. So, as I already said, it started as VI Toolkit, then it became the VMware vSphere PowerCLI, but since it became so huge and covering a lot of other components in the VMworld world, they just called it VMware PowerCLI, which is a much more correct name than just vSphere PowerCLI.
Yeah, one of the other areas that Luke's pointing out on this slide is when we actually went into the PowerShell gallery as well. So those of you that have downloaded or looked at the latest version will know that you can now install PowerCLI very easily by just bringing up a PowerShell session and doing an install module from the actual PowerShell gallery. Super simple stuff and ties into the Microsoft ecosystem. So giving you a little bit more information on what Luke just showed you there, breaking it down a little bit, you can actually see how our commandlets grew from those 8 that Luke initially showed you up to where we are now with 6.5.2, where we have 623 commandlets. So 8 to 623. You can see how they've grown over the years in the various versions. So the numbers are at the top here. You can't see my mouse, but I'm using it on here. So I wonder if this. Aha.
So you're working for Chef as well, but you can't find the mouse.
So you can see the number of commandlets across the top here, and when we brought these in. Along the bottom, as Luke said, we changed the name. You can see these different names across the bottom. And the interesting part about this as well is the yellowy orange looking boxes are actually snap-ins. So those of you who've been using PowerShell for a while know that snap-ins used to be the way that Microsoft used to distribute their product, and then they moved to modules fairly quickly, because modules you can move around, you can copy, you can auto-load, you can do a lot of great enhancements and even install them from a gallery. It's just copy and paste. So you can see where we actually got to the point where we were full modules, and you can see the areas that we covered as we built on PowerCLI as well.
Okay, this is an extract from a session that was given in 2007 at the VMworld in 2007 by Antonio Diaz. He was, in fact, the one who started, at least the one I know, who started with PowerCLI at that time, VI Toolkit. And he had a couple of slides, and you see in there the first actual example of PowerShell or VI Toolkit code that he presented to the audience at that moment. It wasn't, as I said earlier, available only to a limited audience, but these are the first slides with actual PowerCLI code on them that were presented during a VMworld. So the one that that you see there is the get VC, which became now your global variable, in fact, where you have all the default VI servers in there. Okay, and the guy also wrote the very first blog, and it's still available on the PowerCLI blog. If you scroll back and you see that in the top left corner, there's no previous post. This is the first one in a long series of blog posts where he announced and explained what this PowerCLI VI Toolkit at that time would offer to people working in their vSphere environment. So the get VM is, of course, the most obvious command that what he's doing there in that line, for the ones who can't see it at the end, he's just changing the port group of a VM in one single straightforward line. It's very, very simple to use, already at that time.
So we've gone through some information telling you where we came from, but where are we right now? I know I've had that conversation with a few of you this week that are like, yeah, I haven't caught up to date because you guys are making changes real fast. So I thought I'd give you a brief slide of where we are actually right now. As Luke explained, PowerCLI is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's getting a larger breadth within VMware. So we are covering more and more products. As part of that, we changed the name from vSphere PowerCLI to VMware PowerCLI, because it manages VMware products and not just vSphere, as you saw from the list earlier. We clearly went from those snap-ins into modules, as explained. We are now able to deploy it straight from the PowerShell gallery. I know that's something that I find very useful myself, just doing an install module, or when there's a new version, update module, and you've got it, done. We also brought out some newer commandlets that allow you to move the virtual machines across vCenters, so do a cross vCenter vMotion. The feature was brought out in the actual product, and we gave you a commandlet that enhances the move VM commandlet to be able to do that. We came out with a lot of new commandlets in the previous releases, the 6.5, 6.5.1, and 6.5.2, that enable you to automate the entire life cycle of vSAN. So we won't go into those in details. There's a lot of information on our blogs about those if you want to find those out. We then brought out independent disk management commandlets, vVol commandlets, and we introduced a module for Horizon View as well. So you can now access 100% of your Horizon View API and start automating that from a remote server. You don't have to be on the Horizon View server itself.
There's a fan in the room.
I pleased one person, apparently.
Wasn't that shake?
Then Then we brought out some additional commandlets that allowed you to work with DRS cluster groups. We saw some great functions out there from the community that were clearly being used a lot, so we baked those back into the product. We brought out commandlets that allow you to work with storage policy-based management. And then more recently, we brought out some content library commandlets that allow you to deploy virtual machines from the content library, and in the latest version, attach an ISO to a new CD-ROM drive. We also added some additional inventory-based parameters that allow you to specify not just a resource pool, but also a folder at the same time that you're going to deploy your virtual machine to. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the community. Now I've brought you up to date with where we are, because this is the great thing about PowerCLI. It's not us improving the product, it's all of you using the product and the amazing things that you've done with it.
Okay, what is remarkable here is the moment, it's nearly at the same day, it's the day after, when they announced the first technical preview, they also announced the first VMTN community where you could ask questions, answer questions, look up stuff. So that one, until the first official release 1.0 appeared, was a public, a closed community. But then, as you can see here on March 11th, 2008, that became a public community. And we saw a huge increase in number of threads. We have a bit more information on that later on. We saw a huge increase in threads, but also a huge increase in replies. So people were actively working together on this new product. People had questions, other people who already encountered that problem replied. There was no holding back. It was really about sharing and trying to get the most out of this product. Because apparently at that time, everybody, I was at least, was looking at a way of automating the environment that we had. So that community was something that, from day one, in my opinion, influenced the massive growth of the PowerCLI product. We did do a few, what we would like to call infographics on the thing, that give you a few smaller pieces of information. What we did is we looked, as you can see in the top left corner, we looked at about 10 years of information. Now for 2007 there wasn't a lot of information, because that was all by the end of the year that we actually started using that community. But there are a few interesting things to be remarked here. If we look at the community, there's about 3.2 threads, questions being opened per day. Now I know most of you don't work in the weekend, so if we bring it back to business days, we arrive at 4.2 threads over those 10 years that we see appearing in the community. All in all, over those 10 years, we had more than 11,000 questions in there, which is massive for one product, in my opinion. But what is even more remarkable is the other figure that you see underneath there, that we had 5,591 correct answers. That means people who asked the question marked the specific answer as correct. That means they have a solution rate of nearly 50% in there. So if you ask a question in that community, there's a good chance, 1 in 2, according to the statistics, that you get a correct answer to your question, which I think for a public community forum is a quite impressive number.
And that's just the people that marked it as correct, right?
Yes, correct.
You're not counting the people that used the code, it was correct, and then didn't mark it as correct.
Yeah, there's quite a few of those around as well, but okay. It gives you an indication, especially if you start comparing it with other communities, but we're not going to do that here in this session. What is also interesting, to show you how huge this community is, there were in total 4,399 different people who asked a question in there. That is quite impressive, and a lot of those people asked more than one question, of course. And what is even better, and that's something that you won't find in other forums, the people who answered that a question, who gave a reply, was 5,141 individual people. That means you have more people who reply to something than people that ask questions. So it's a very contributing, sharing community as far as I'm concerned, judging from these figures here.
So let's break those stats down a little bit more. You can actually see that the average answered time is 2.4 days. The shortest response time was 59 seconds. We didn't look up who that was, but I mean, any guesses?
No.
Yeah, no. No guesses, Luke.
My query doesn't handle it yet.
The longest response time was 1,009 days. I mean, Luke, where were you?
There was something wrong in my browser cache, I'm afraid.
Right. The most replies to a thread we see is 166. That's a single thread with 166 replies. I'm interested in looking at that one and actually seeing what they're talking about, because clearly there's something I need to enhance in the product there.
No. To be honest, that's a contribution from a person who made a performance script, and he kept getting asked. He kept getting questions. Can we add this? Can you change this format? So it grew over history, over time, quite enormously. And the script is quite interesting then.
So we need to do better with our performance commandlets then.
That could be a tip, yeah.
The most views on a single post, 94,303. It's pretty impressive. And the top creator of these, the VMinator, are you in the room?
I think he became quite inactive in the last couple of years. I don't think he's still following.
I was wondering if he should be in the room, because if he's asking that many questions, he might want to learn how to...
You have a point.
No, nobody tweet that guy and say I said that. And the top replier, I've left it blank. I mean, who do you think? Come on, have a guess. Luke. Any other guesses? Me? I wish. Of course, Luke Deakins. That is an impressive number of replies. I mean, I'd hate to do the stats that says when he answered these questions, what time in the morning it was. But that's very impressive, Luke, and I thank you, because I know you answered a lot of my questions as well.
You're welcome. Okay, we dived in a couple, since these are interesting figures, we decided to create a number of extra graphics here. If you look at the total number of threads per year, questions per year, what we see here is a nice curve. So it would give you the impression that by the end of the 10-year cycle that people are less interested in PowerCLI. Now, that's definitely not the case. What we see is that the obvious questions started in the first 3-4 years there. Things like, how do I create a snapshot? How do I remove a snapshot on a daily basis? And if you look at the right side of these bars, the questions become much more technical. It's things like, how do I change the MAC address when I do an OS customization on a Red Hat 7? I mean, the level is quite different from how do I remove a snapshot. So that's still on a yearly basis a quite impressive number of threads that we see there. What is also interesting, if you look over the week, we already had the earlier stats where we said how many threads that were created per day. Now, if you look over a day, which hour in the day that the threads are created, there's some interesting things to be discovered here. Okay, during the night period, which is quite common for the whole worldwide group, but what we see here, if around 8-9 o'clock in the morning, that's when Europe starts waking up, and they start making, so they have been thinking all night long about a certain problem, and they decided, I can't find it, I'm going to open a question here. Then the Europeans, they go to lunch around 12 o'clock, and you see a little dip there. 14, 15, I think that's the East Coast that is waking up, and they also have been pondering all night long on questions, and they start opening questions. In the meantime, the Europeans, they have digested the lunch, and they come back with other questions. And then the next top, that's around 18, 19. For information, those timings are UTC. I had to select one time. So in the evening, that's where I suppose where the West Coast comes in, and those people start being active on the community as well. And then it goes down, and people go to, most of the people go to sleep. There's still a few awake, but that's negligible, I think. What is also interesting, if you look at the months over the year, so what activities, what I find interesting here is the 3 first months of a year are always peaks on number of questions. So I suspect that people, for their New Year's resolution, they say, I'm going to be more active on VMware automation. So we see a lot of more questions coming up. And then around May, June, they start preparing for their holidays. Questions go down a bit. They come back well rested August, September. So we see a little increase again. And then by the end of the year, we have all these festivities starting with Halloween, Christmas, New Year. That's where we have the lowest peak to jump up again in January. So quite interesting information there.
And what is interesting about these is that if you do the correct stats, you can work out when Luke takes his holidays and vacations. So potentially there's some time to get in there and answer some questions.
What I thought was interesting, and I see this in a lot of presentations on whatever, people take a keyword of what they're talking about and they enter it in Google, hit enter, and then they look at the number of hits that they have. And if you just enter their PowerCLI, that's a quite impressive number again. That's more than 400,000 entries that Google knows about that contain the keyword Google. So that was quite impressive. Now, of course, we always co-present, and sometimes I want to know what the other one is doing in our team. So I Googled PowerCLI and virtual, and I said, that's quite impressive. He has 250,000 something entries in Google.
I'll go with that. I'll go with that.
I could be. I said, yeah, okay. Normally you don't Google yourself, but I did in any case. And I was a bit disappointed. And my wife immediately asked me what is happening. You seem to be a bit down. I said, yeah, have a look at these Google results. But then I realized that Google has a very interesting algorithm to look at things. So apparently Google doesn't take into account this dash. So everything that mentions virtual and PowerCLI was attributed to my co-speaker here. And my wife was very happy because she got some nice presents afterwards.
So I don't believe that slide, so I'm just going to leave it there. So if you want to take your photos right now, this is the right point, okay? Thanks, Luke. So we thought we'd also take a look at some of the scripts that we wrote early on as well to see what enhancements and how we'd learned as well, to show you, that it's not just new people that are learning. We're constantly learning with PowerCLI. There's always ways to do things. There's enhancements in PowerShell, and there's ways to make your scripts better. When you revisit your scripts, you've gained in knowledge, and you go back to them, and you say, what the hell is that I wrote, and how was I doing that? And you rewrite it, and often in less lines of code or more performant ways.
That's the first. Where do we start?
Well, you need to talk about it first.
Okay. Okay, this is one of my scripts I wrote way back, 7-8 years I think already. What people seem to be experiencing a lot is that they had VMs that got unregistered from vCenter. And that means that your VMX and all the corresponding files for your VM are still sitting out there on the data store, but vCenter doesn't know about it anymore. So I wrote a small script because the question was coming back quite a lot in the community. And I used an API method there, search data store subfolders, to find or look through all the files, find the VMXs, look and check in vCenter if that VMX had a corresponding VM that was registered. If not, you had the option to register the VMX under vCenter. Later on, there was a second version published, and that used, instead of the API method, that used the PS drive with the data store provider. But still, that was a bit slowish, especially in 5.5.5. So when I discovered by accident, quite a bit of time ago, that you could also, I think it was an article of William, who else, where you can access files through HTTP on your servers. I decided, why can't I use that? If I have the information to run through the directories of a data store with an HTTP method, I could use that to find those VMX files on the data store instead of using the API method. And I adapted the script a bit. There's a short demo that we're going to play here.
Yep, hit space and it'll start. And pause it with space.
Yeah?
Yep.
Is it running?
Yep, hit space.
Okay, what I did is I did a PowerShell clock at the top so you can see, because sometimes I sped up the video. I don't want you to look at the screen that is doing nothing during 10-20 seconds. This is in fact the original script here, what I just explained. We look at this search subfolder method. We have a small test environment. We are going to look or find all the orphaned VMs on a data store cluster. So these are a number of test VMs I created there. Now if you look at the script and we run it, we should find that there are no orphaned files. This is quite good. And the speed this is done with the HTTP method. The speed is quite good compared to the earlier search subfolder method. Now we're going to remove a couple of VMs. And just to show that through this HTTP we can achieve the same result, finding the files with the orphaned files, we run the same script again. And the result now says, since we deleted 2, that there are 2 orphaned files. So the script has the same functionality as the one that I published 7 years ago. The only difference is I'm not using any API methods anymore. I'm just using straightforward HTTP access to those data stores. Okay. There's a slide here. You're the point. Done. Okay, there's a slide here where I recap the code that I've been using, where you see at the line in the middle, invoke web request. That's where I'm actually firing this HTTP request to the server to find the list of files that is sitting on that data store. There's a complete chapter in the vSphere documentation where they explain to you what format your URI should have to access these files. So what we're trying to say, like Alan said, we sometimes need to review our scripts because there are other methods, new features announced, and it's good to sometimes have a new look at something that you already did before.
Yeah. And so while Luke was talking about REST APIs and how he accessed this particular REST API to enhance his scripts, I thought I'd bring up the other aspect of my job, which is the REST APIs. And, you know, it's been clear throughout this week and throughout 6.5 and throughout all the blogs that we're putting out that VMware is headed towards a REST API. So what does it actually mean for people that use PowerCLI? We thought we'd dig into that a little bit. You know, clearly PowerShell itself is able to call a REST API. It's able to use the invoke web request that Luke just showed you to call any generic REST API for any product, not just VMware, and actually return that information. So the commandlets are there for you to be able to work with any REST endpoint using PowerShell. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have used those before. We're clearly bringing out more and more REST features into Virtual Center. In fact, the directive that we have is that all new APIs come out via REST only. So you're going to see more and more APIs coming out via the REST API. As part of this, we also created a couple of commandlets that allow you to work with this REST API. The connect CIS server and the get CIS service commandlets. And you can kind of think of these like the get view for the SOAP API, but these are the equivalent for the REST API. And they access 100% of what's in those APIs. They make session management easier, and they allow you to actually work with this API in a very discoverable way. So I'm going to show you a demonstration of that, first of all. And this is the new API Explorer that's in 6.5. You can see I've just gone to my Virtual Center /API Explorer. I can access a number of different API areas, and I'm logged in as my administrator account. As I go down, just to show you an example, I have the VM in there, and it shows me to get a list of the VMs. It's a get on vCenter VM, and I can also delete and update them as well. And it's going to return these things in JSON, so the memory, the CPU, the name, the power state. I can also use filters to actually filter down the results that are sent to me via this API. And the great thing about this is when we get down to the bottom of this filter area, you'll see the response messages that give you exactly what errors you might find. And we can try it out as well live on our box. So once we've tried it out, again, we're doing a get on that call. You can see that it does indeed return the results in JSON. So standard REST type interface here. And if we look at the way we might do that using the PowerShell commandlets, we can, of course, build our authorization header from our credentials, and then we can use that invoke web request to call the API that allows us to log in, store our header information in our token, and then we can take that token, build it up so that we can use it later on. Next time we do the invoke web request to do a get on vCenter VM, we use that session and we convert the results from JSON into a PowerShell object and then show them on the screen. Very basic REST type stuff using the PowerShell commandlets. And you can see it works pretty well. But as I said, we introduced some different commandlets that allow you to work with that REST API. So that 14 lines of code that was on the last screen is actually a lot easier to do using the commandlets for our specific API. In fact, you can see we're doing a connect CIS server, and we're using the IP address of the virtual center, the username and password, so you don't have to deal with building all these tokens and headers and all this kind of stuff before you invoke the REST API. And then we have the get CIS service commandlet that allows us to work with the services. As we saw before, it's vCenter VM. So I'm going to connect first of all, and we're going to take a quick look at these services. So we're going to take the get CIS service commandlet and run that. And as you can see, it gives us a list of everything that's in this API, in the REST API. So it's a good way to discover what I can actually work with as part of this REST API. And then I can narrow that down to say I want to work with com VMware vCenter VM. So I'm going to store that inside a variable right now. I'm going to store it inside of service variable. And then the great thing about this is we can actually take that, do a get member on it, and instantly see the areas that we can work with through this API. So clearly through the REST commandlets that we saw on the previous demo, you would have to know exactly what you're doing and what methods you are calling. With this version, you can discover what's in the API. We can see that there's a create, a delete, a get, and a list. And then we can actually use that list to list the virtual machines that are in our environment. So we can call the REST API in this case. We can select the bits that we're interested in, and we can return the results. So you can see how we're doing the same thing in both examples, but how we've actually created these commandlets to access everything that's in that REST API, whether it's virtual machines, whether it's data stores, whether it's folders, whether it's content library, tagging, appliance-based APIs. All of these will work through this REST API and are accessed in exactly the same way. Some better examples of these, that was a very basic example, is the work that William Lamb did on Virtually Ghetto at this address. That allows you to access some functions where he's working with the REST API to automate some of the appliance features. They're definitely worth looking at. They're in the GitHub repository, so take a look at those and see how they're formed. You should have a bit more of an understanding, now I've shown you this, how he actually built those. But REST is everywhere, as we said. REST is an easy way to access things, not just for VMware, but for other products as well.
Mm-hmm. When Alan announced the first time that he would be providing this API Explorer, which is great, by the way, and specific commandlets to access these REST API methods, I got some questions from people. Do we now need to learn this complete functioning of REST just to be able to have another method to access our vSphere VMware environment? And in fact, you don't. Like Alan already mentioned, the REST is everywhere. More and more you see in products that they provide you with a REST API. One of them is, what I did is based on an old script I had where you could query the VMTN community. You could send search keywords in there and got back some threads in there. But that was based on constructing HTML strings as if you would be in a browser, and then later on interpreting the HTML body that you got back. Now, since that the VMTN community, the VMware community, is based on Jive, Jive has since 2 releases, if I'm not mistaken, a very functional, full REST API available. So I decided to revisit my script from years back and convert it completely to using REST methods. And we have a small demo on that. I think you run it first. Okay. Okay. So we are in fact looking at this community. No, that's
playing.
Okay. Well, there is a search option in the community on VMTN, but we want to automate that, of course, since we are all PowerShell and PowerCLI adepts. So I decided to write a number of functions. The basic function in there is the one that executes the invoke REST method. Invoke REST method is a PowerShell commandlet that is somewhat similar, lower level than the invoke web request, and you can do a lot of stuff in there. You specify the methods, the URI, and so on. Just scrolling through the code here. What I'm ultimately doing, I'm going to launch a query with a number of keywords. You see those in that splat hash table that I'm using. More on that later on in the slides. And I'm firing that off to the VMTN community, the REST API. It's running, which you can see by the, not on this screen apparently, but it was orange a minute ago. And it immediately opens the top 3 results that were returned from the VMTN community. So if you have now a query that you want to launch there, instead of doing it by going and typing in the browser, you can just automate this through a script. But the more important part here is that we wanted to show you that this working with REST APIs is more common and common. You will find it everywhere, in fact, nowadays. Okay, this is the explanation why. Now, another thing, and we showed that during the demo, which is quite important, Alan already mentioned earlier, we need from time to time revisit our scripts. One of the things that we should be adding to our scripts is a bit more security, especially the ones that contain code that could be deconstructive, remove stuff, in fact. And there's a very good option in PowerShell with what if commandlet. We have a demo on that. This one we already covered, I think.
Okay. Let's run it.
Okay. There was a question at one point where people historically had a number of permissions distributed over their tree structure in their vSphere environment. And you know that this works, VMs are created, you put a permission on a folder later on a VM, but some of these permissions are the same. You put them on a higher level, on a lower level. You don't need all of these. You can clean this up. So I decided to write a small thing that would clean up this permission inheritance from your complete infrastructure. There's 2 things in there. First of all, since it's a tree structure, the ideal thing, methodology to work in that way is to do a recursive function. So we're calling the function several times again. I'm first listing the existing permissions on that system before we clean up. So we have a list here. Are we there yet? Okay, what is there? By the way, all this is done in Visual Studio Code, a new editor, newish, which I definitely advise you to have a look at because it has a lot of interesting features and is way better, in my opinion, than the ISE. And on top of that, Microsoft will stop with the ISE ultimately. Now, we are going to actually do the cleanup. This is a recursive function. Like I said, it will run through each node in your vSphere tree, see if that permission that is specific on that node was already set on a higher node, so you could remove it. In fact, it's a double permission. We're running that, but we're running that in such a way. Okay, this is again where I call the function calls itself again, that's the recursion part. Now, if we're running this the first time, because this is going to remove permissions, we want to be careful, we do a what if option. This what if option will not actually execute anything, it will just tell us what it is going to do. Then, when we're sure that we're doing the right thing, I mean, actually sure that we're doing the right thing, we remove this what if, and then we are actually executing the removal of these permissions in our directory tree. To prove it, we do now the same inventory script that we did to begin with. We do a post report. And another nice feature of the Visual Studio Code Editor is that you have a kind of extension that allows you to make a difference between two files. That's what we're going to do here. So we take file 1 and file 2, and we ask him, instead of doing it ourselves, we ask him to compare those two files. And as you can see, we go here from 30-something, I think. If I'm not, he will tell us in a minute. We were able to seriously read, okay, from 30 to 18 permissions, we were able to remove 12 permissions that weren't really necessary because they were already given on a higher level. This again is the view from the web client where you see that these permissions are actually gone and that we have less permissions there in that list. There's the part of the code, I think.
That's the early one.
Yeah. There's the REST API, how we skipped a bit. Okay, this was the permission part. We did the demo. That's what I just explained. Okay, this is the part that we just showed briefly, where the function calls itself again. This is the recursive part. And what we also have in there is this what if that I showed you. If you use this what if keyword, and it's quite easy to use that, that's what the next slide will show you. You just define in your function at the beginning that you're going to support this kind of common parameters, switches in this case, and then you just have to provide one line, the one at the bottom there, that will be done, executed when you add the what if switch on this call of the function. So this is something that you would definitely need to look at if you're writing functions yourself. Remember, PowerCLI started with PowerShell 1. PowerShell has grown as well. We're at 5.1 at the moment. There's new features. And review some of your older stuff and see how you can make use of these new features that are available in PowerShell and in PowerCLI.
So I actually learned something when you were doing that demo as well. I didn't know VS Code did a diff like that. So that's
an extension that you can
that's pretty cool.
Install.
Okay. So the one thing I want to say about today is you've seen how far the product has grown. You've seen how far the community has grown, and it's not stopping. It's getting bigger and bigger. I sat in the PowerCLI 101 session earlier on today, and the room was double the size of this room. They had hundreds of people there, clearly coming on board, learning PowerCLI. So the community is growing from strength to strength, and I want to thank you guys definitely for taking part in that community and being active. You know, we've mentioned a couple of times, I love hearing your feedback. We love getting your responses. Please do let us know when you have stuff that doesn't work or you want to make easier. I do want to point out that in 30 minutes, we do have another session, or I have another session at least, with Jake Robinson, who is the PowerCLI product manager. And we'll actually be going into a bit more detail about what we brought out in the previous releases up until now in 6.5. We'll give you some examples there, some demonstrations. We'll talk about why PowerCLI is relevant with VMware Cloud on AWS. And we'll also give you a glimpse into the areas that we are thinking about in the future. So it's definitely going to be one of those ones that is a little bit more interactive, because I want to know what you think of the ideas that we are bringing up and whether these are the right things that we should be looking at. So it's in Islander C, lower level. I have no idea where that is. I guess I'll find it because I'm presenting downstairs somewhere, hence the lower. And it's 30 minutes from now, so you know, feel free to leave early, grab a coffee, get a drink, and go get in line. The takeaways, I just want you to know that PowerCLI has certainly come a long way, and it's all with your help, clearly. The community has grown from strength to strength and keeps growing, and PowerCLI is here to stay and has a very bright future, which you will learn more about in the next session. So we have left about 10 minutes for questions. So if you do have any questions about what we spoke about today, or the product, or feature requests, I'd like you to come up to the mic, please, so they can catch that on the recording.
For those who are running to the other session, thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Much appreciate that.
And fill out your surveys.
I want a shirt.
You want a shirt? Jake Robinson has the shirts. I'm not sure how many he has, so he's going to hate me for saying that.
Is he at the back of the room?
I see him walking up right now. He's the guy with the dodgy-looking beard.
I was going to ask the same question.
Any questions that are not about the shirts?
There's one.
NSX.
Official model. Great product.
Power NSX.
Yeah, clearly there is Power NSX, which is a community-driven module, but NSX itself is certainly an area that we're interested in, and we are working with the team to do some interesting stuff.
Hey, I'm going to make you work for those shirts. You have to show me a commit on the PowerCLI example scripts repo on GitHub. You show me that commit, and you get a shirt today.
Whoa, set the bar.
All right, so I have a question for you. So I do a lot of PowerCLI myself. I did a presentation here at VMworld about it, my first one. It's about link clones, and so my question, though, is more about backup specifically. For PowerCLI itself, is there any plans for a module to actually back up basically every single feature in vCenter independently of each other? So I know you guys have a lot of it, and you guys have made great leaps with it. I used it myself to be able to migrate from Windows vCenter to VCSA myself when you guys didn't have a migration path for 6.0. I made it and did
Yeah.
It wasn't quite perfect, but it worked.
Yeah, so what do you mean by backup, actually?
I want to be able to export any piece of information, and then the idea is if I had to rebuild vCenter from scratch, I could just re-import all these individual pieces of information, and boom, all of a sudden I'm back up and going again. I might have lost all my logging and past information, but...
So a couple of things about that. You know, clearly you should be using the VCSA now. We've made it quite clear that the VCSA is the future.
Backup's not fully functional.
There is a backup API on the VCSA where you're able to export the information and re-import that as part of the appliance. William has a script that does that. If that's what you want, if you want to go down to the actual subject level and back up your permissions or back up your folders or whatever, I believe William has also done some great work on that recently and presented a session on it at this VMworld. So I would definitely check out his blog over the next, I don't know, couple of days, couple of weeks. He'll make sure that it's available, and he's done some great work there. You know, he's built some of the modules that export and import that data. Yeah, so just to repeat, these will be available through the GitHub repository, and he's been working with Kyle on those. Kyle Ruddy.
Very much appreciated.
Good question, thank you. And thanks for presenting on PowerCLI.
Any more questions?
Okay, thank you very much for your time.